Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases ever, recorded in the history of Baton Rouge. Before we begin, we invite you to leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing how far these documented accounts travel and at what hours of the day or night they reach their audience. On the morning of August 23, 1848, a local merchant named Richard Caldwell was making his way down the muddy path along the eastern banks of the Mississippi River, just outside the growing settlement of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The air hung thick with humidity, as was common during late summer in the region. What caught his attention, and what would later become the first documented piece of evidence in what came to be known as the Whitmore-Broussard case, was an abandoned carriage, its wheel partially submerged in the soft riverbank mud. Inside, Caldwell found only a single glove, a man's leather ledger with no entries, and, peculiarly, a silver locket containing no photograph. The carriage bore the insignia of the Whitmore plantation, one of the larger estates located some 5 miles east of the city. By noon that same day, when Caldwell reported his discovery to the Baton Rouge constable, it was noted that no one from the Whitmore household had been seen in town for nearly 3 weeks. While it was not uncommon for plantation owners to remain on their property for extended periods, especially during harvest seasons, Samuel Whitmore was known to be meticulous about his weekly visits to the First Bank of Baton Rouge every Thursday without fail. According to bank records later accessed during the investigation, Whitmore had missed 3 consecutive appointments without sending word. Constable James Harrington dispatched 2 deputies to the Whitmore plantation later that afternoon. What they discovered there would become the foundation of one of the most disturbing documented cases in the history of Eastview. Baton Rouge Parish, a case that, for reasons that would later become apparent, was deliberately kept from official records for nearly 70 years. According to the deputy's initial report, the main house appeared in perfect order. The 27 enslaved laborers continued working the cotton fields as if nothing were amiss. House servants maintained their duties. Meals had been prepared and served. Beds had been made. It appeared as though the Whitmore family was simply elsewhere on the property. But they weren't. Samuel Whitmore, age 46, his wife Elizabeth, age 42, and their 3 adult children, Thomas, aged 23, Catherine, aged 20, and William, aged 18, were nowhere to be found. The only household member whose behavior seemed unusual was Adeline Broussard, a house slave of approximately 30 years of age, who, according to other servants, had begun sitting motionless in the parlor whenever she was not attending to her duties. When questioned by deputies, none of the enslaved workers reported anything unusual. Each one gave the same response, delivered in nearly identical wording. Master Whitmore has gone to visit his brother in Natchez. He is expected back before the harvest. The problem was simple. Samuel Whitmore had no brother in Natchez. Records indicated he had no brothers at all. Over the following weeks, an investigation was quietly conducted. Neighboring plantation owners were consulted. The Whitmore family's absence was acknowledged. But curiously, none expressed concern. Like the enslaved workers, they appeared to accept without question that the family had simply gone away temporarily. When pressed further, they grew uncomfortable and changed the subject. Parish records from September 1848 indicate that Judge Martin Lambert, a business associate of Samuel Whitmore, initiated a more formal inquiry. It was Lambert who first noted what he described as the strange silence surrounding the entire affair. "It is not merely that the family has disappeared," he wrote in his private journal discovered decades later. "It is that no one seems willing to speak of it. It is as if the community has collectively agreed to look away." By October of 1848, with the Whitmore family still missing, the plantation continued to operate as if nothing were wrong. Harvest proceeded on schedule. Cotton was collected and shipped. Profits were deposited into the Whitmore account at the First Bank of Baton Rouge. According to bank records, the deposits were authorized by a signature matching Samuel Whitmore's, though the man himself was never seen. During this period, disturbing reports about Adeline Broussard's behavior began to surface. Previously noted for sitting silently in the parlor, she was now observed occupying the master bedroom. According to hushed accounts later documented by Lambert, she had begun wearing Elizabeth Whitmore's clothing and jewelry. Even more unsettling were reports that Adeline had begun speaking as if she were Mrs. Whitmore, giving orders in a near-perfect imitation of the missing woman's voice and mannerisms. The other house slaves, apparently fearful, complied without question. In his private notes, Judge Lambert recorded interviewing a field slave named Moses, who had been caught attempting to flee the plantation in early November. Before being returned, Moses allegedly told Lambert, "There ain't no Whitmores no more. Miss Adeline says there never was." Lambert noted that after Moses was returned to the plantation, he was never seen again. His disappearance was officially explained as a successful escape attempt, despite doubled patrols established after his first attempt. By December 1848, a strange pattern had emerged. The plantation continued functioning. Business transactions occurred. Cotton was sold. Supplies were purchased. Yet the family remained absent. Even more troubling were accounts from tradespeople visiting the property. They described being greeted by Adeline Broussard, who now openly presented herself as Mrs. Whitmore. One milliner delivering hats ordered months earlier later wrote, "The woman received me in the parlor dressed in Mrs. Whitmore's clothing. She spoke with perfect diction and addressed me as though we had met many times before. When I inquired after Mrs. Whitmore, she looked at me strangely and said, 'I am Mrs. Whitmore.' What disturbed me most was not her claim, but how naturally she inhabited the role." Judge Lambert, increasingly troubled, attempted to organize a deeper investigation. In January 1849, his efforts were blocked at every turn. Officials insisted plantation matters were private. Fellow judges advised him to leave the matter alone. In a letter to his brother discovered after his death, Lambert wrote, "Something has happened here that no one wishes to acknowledge. It is as if speaking of it might make it real, so they choose instead to look away and pretend." The most disturbing development came in February 1849, when a daguerreotype photograph taken during a gathering of neighboring plantation owners later surfaced. The image shows a formal dinner party. At the head of the table sits not Samuel Whitmore, but Adeline Broussard, dressed in fine clothing. More unsettling still, none of the white guests appear disturbed. They smile, converse, and raise glasses as if nothing were unusual. According to later analysis, the guests show no awareness that anything is amiss. The African-American woman seated at the head of the table is treated as though she were truly the lady of the house. By March 1849, Lambert's inquiries attracted unwanted attention. He reported anonymous threats. His home was vandalized. In April, he was removed from the bench on charges of mental instability. Soon afterward, he relocated to New Orleans, taking his investigation records with him. The most comprehensive account of what may have happened emerged years later. In 1865, following the Civil War, a formerly enslaved man named Isaiah Cooper provided testimony to Union Army officers documenting conditions in newly liberated territories. Cooper described events that occurred on the night of August 1, 1848, 3 weeks before Caldwell discovered the abandoned carriage. According to Cooper, tensions had been building for years. Samuel Whitmore possessed a cruelty, he said, not the kind that left marks on the body, but the kind that broke something inside. Adeline Broussard, Cooper claimed, suffered more than most. Purchased in 1842, she had previously belonged to a French family in New Orleans, was educated and spoke both English and French fluently. Though bought to serve as Elizabeth Whitmore's personal maid, Cooper claimed Whitmore had darker intentions. On August 1st, Adeline prepared an elaborate dinner, After the meal, family members began choking and gasping. Cooper claimed Adeline had poisoned them. What followed bordered on incomprehensible. Adeline gathered the household workers and calmly announced that the Whitmores had gone to visit family in Natchez and that she would manage affairs in their absence. Cooper could never explain how everyone accepted this. Trusted field hands were ordered to bury the bodies in remote, swampland rarely visited. It is that we can look directly at them and see nothing at all. In 1965, historian Dr. Eleanor Pritchard attempted to publish a comprehensive study of the Whitmore case. Despite meticulous research, her manuscript was rejected repeatedly and ultimately shelved, not out of reluctance to confront slavery itself, but because the case represented something even more destabilizing, a complete inversion of the social order, quietly tolerated by the very society it threatened. When Pritchard sought access to local records, the East Baton Rouge Historical Society responded bluntly. No such family appeared in their archives. Evidence, meanwhile, continued to surface. In 1966, renovations at the First Bank of Baton Rouge uncovered hidden ledgers, showing plantation finances continuing after the family's disappearance. Earlier signatures matched Samuel Whitmore's handwriting. Later ones appeared to be careful imitations. Account activity shifted, suggesting someone methodically reconstructing a new identity while maintaining plantation operations. Records showed purchases of educational materials, clothing, and eventually freedom papers for enslaved individuals, transactions that went unquestioned by bank officials. Researchers later concluded that what occurred was not sudden chaos, but a long, careful reinvention supported by collective silence or willful blindness. Psychologist Dr. Catherine Monroe later described this phenomenon as a form of collective dissociation. When reality threatens deeply held beliefs, communities unconsciously reshape what they see to preserve their understanding of the world. In simpler terms, people saw what they needed to see. The plantation owners, merchants, bankers, and enslaved workers all participated in maintaining a story that allowed life to continue without confronting consequences too dangerous to acknowledge. After the Civil War, Adelaide White gradually transitioned into legal ownership of the property. By Reconstruction, her existence could be explained as that of a free woman of color who somehow acquired land, unusual, but no longer impossible. Church records show her as a respected congregant, while memories describe her as Madame White, a healer who aided both black and white families and helped former slaves establish independent lives. A photograph believed to show her around. 1875 depicts an elderly woman seated calmly on a farmhouse porch, plainly dressed, dignified and far removed from the enslaved woman she once was. Adelaide White died in 1882. Her modest estate was distributed among local families, many formerly enslaved. Her earlier life went unmentioned. The cemetery where she was buried was relocated in 1959, and her grave marker was lost. Today, her resting place remains unknown. The Whitmore-Broussard case survives only as a historical footnote, rarely explored in depth. Yet its themes, power, denial, identity, and collective self-deception remain disturbingly relevant. As Dr. Pritchard once wrote, the Whitmore case is less about the past than about our enduring ability to embrace comforting illusions rather than confront unsettling truths. Physical evidence has been erased, buildings demolished, graves paved over, documents hidden or destroyed. Yet the story persists because it speaks to something fundamental about human nature. In a 1964 interview, Clara Johnson, born into slavery, in the parish, was asked about the Whitmore plantation. After a long pause, she answered, "Some stories don't get told straight. They live in what people don't say. Folks knew what happened there. They just found it easier to look away. And sometimes looking away is its own kind of seeing. Perhaps the most disturbing element is not the violence itself, but how easily societies can agree to maintain illusions when reality threatens their foundations. Because sometimes, the scariest truth is not what we are capable of doing, but how easily we convince ourselves it never happened. How desperately we work to preserve comforting illusions, even when overwhelming evidence stands against them. In 1968, a final piece of the puzzle surfaced. During renovations of an old home in New Orleans' Garden District, hidden within the walls was a collection of letters written between 1848 and 1851. They were correspondence between Caroline Beaumont, Elizabeth Whitmore's sister, and her husband, who was serving as a diplomat in France at the time. Within these letters, Caroline repeatedly expressed growing concern about her sister's sudden silence. In September 1848, she wrote, "I have received no word from Elizabeth since my letter in July. I have written twice more, and even sent a messenger to the plantation, yet I am told the family is traveling. This is most unlike my sister, who never cared to leave home." By November, her worry had deepened. "I attempted to visit the plantation myself, but was received by Elizabeth's maid, Adeline, who insisted the family was away. There was something in her manner that unsettled me greatly, though I cannot say why. She spoke as Elizabeth might, used her familiar expressions. When I pressed her about their return, she smiled in a way that chilled me and said, 'They are never coming back.' But we need not speak of that." Her January 1849 letter is perhaps the most revealing. "I have spoken with Judge Lambert, who agrees that something is terribly wrong. Yet whenever we raise the matter, we are met with indifference or even hostility. It is as though no one wishes to acknowledge anything amiss. More disturbing still, the Bradfords claim to have dined with my sister only last week. When I insisted this was impossible, Mrs. Bradford suggested that perhaps I was unwell." Caroline's final letter on the matter, dated March 1849, reveals her growing isolation. "My questions about Elizabeth are met with silence. Even Judge Lambert now advises me to let the matter rest. I find myself wondering whether I've imagined this mystery. And yet I know my sister. She would never leave without word. Something terrible has happened, but it seems I alone believe it." Shortly afterward, Caroline returned to France to join her husband and never returned to Louisiana. The case, it seems, claimed not only the Whitmore family, but also the peace of mind of those who refused to accept the convenient fiction. In dozens of later letters discovered alongside these, Caroline never again mentioned her sister. Unable to reconcile truth with the version society insisted upon, she erased the matter from her correspondence, if not from her memory. This deliberate forgetting extended beyond individuals to the historical record itself. The systematic removal of the Whitmore-Broussard story from official histories represents another form of violence. The violence of omission, allowing comfortable narratives to survive while uncomfortable truths disappear. And yet, despite attempts at erasure, fragments endured in private documents, oral histories, and scattered academic efforts brave enough to confront the implications. The story survives because it speaks to something fundamental in human nature. The tale of Samuel Whitmore and Adeline Broussard is not merely one of murder or deception. It is a study in collective delusion, the human tendency to see what we need to see rather than what truly stands before us. Reality, it reminds us, is not only what exists, but what we are willing to acknowledge. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that this capacity for self-deception is not confined to the past. We too participate in fictions that allow our world to feel orderly. We too look away from truths that threaten our sense of stability. And like those who once accepted Adeline Broussard sitting in Elizabeth Whitmore's place, we may not recognize our own illusions until long after they have shaped our reality. The final words may belong to Judge Martin Lambert, who wrote shortly before his death. The most terrifying aspect of this affair is not what it reveals about Adeline Broussard or even slavery itself. It is what it reveals about us all. Our willingness to embrace a lie rather then confront a truth that disturbs our sense of order. I fear this tendency lives within every human heart, waiting for the moment reality becomes too painful to face. Today, Baton Rouge has grown over the land where these events unfolded. Highways, shopping centers, and neighborhoods have erased all visible traces of the plantation. Thousands pass daily over ground that once witnessed an extraordinary collapse of social order. Like those before us, we move through landscapes haunted by histories we have collectively chosen to forget. But some stories refuse burial. They rise again, like bodies in shallow graves after heavy rain. They whisper through old letters and fading photographs, reminding us that the most disturbing horrors are not supernatural. They are human. And sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones we see, but the truths we refuse to acknowledge.